All right, to be respectful of everybody's time, thank you for everybody for joining. I'm Michael Bond. I'm from the current president of Maryland ACEP. And tonight I'm going to hand things over to Dr. Kerry Forrestal, who is president-elect for Maryland ACEP, and to Dana Kaufman, our lobbyist, to give an update on our current Maryland legislative session. This is year two for most of our legislators. So last year, for our first year, for a lot of our legislators, they're learning the ropes. They don't put in a lot of bills. So this year we were expecting a lot more bills, which I think Dana has dug through. That's why she might look more tired than usual. And then we're also dealing with the year of no money. So a lot of things that we wanted to try to push through the legislature is not going to happen if it's going to require money. So there's been lots of talk about not trying to raise taxes. But that doesn't mean that we won't raise fees on things. So a different form of taxation. But so there's lots of efforts to try to reduce the burden that our government puts on us through fees and taxes, which makes it difficult to get some things through. But without further ado, Dr. Forrestal and Dr. Ms. Kaufman.
All right, thank you all for coming, and I see we're growing in numbers. That's excellent. So, yeah, this is our latest quarterly town hall. We're going to try to do these on a fairly regular basis, either bi-monthly or quarterly. We've had Gene Ransom, and we've had some other speakers who are experts, and tonight we have Dana Kaufman, who's been guiding. How long have you been our lobbyist? How long have you been guiding us?
I think I have been with you for probably at least 10 years. I've been with the firm for 14.
Gosh,
So it
terrific.
might be even 14. But this is my 30th session.
Wow, that's amazing.
Or sad.
Um,
No kidding.
We did do testimony yesterday. They were trying to expand scope of practice for pharmacists to be able to just walk up and say, I have a cold and get some medications without a doctor or provider being involved. There was also the naturopaths were again trying to get prescriptive authority. We did not get to testify on that one. We didn't see that one coming. But without further ado, then I'm going to let Dana talk to you about, or Dana talk to you about all the important stuff that's coming up.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you for giving me this opportunity. So, for the record, I'm Dana Kaufman. I'm with the law firm of Schwartz, Wise, and Kaufman. I do represent, of course, the Maryland ACEP, but I also represent MedChi and some additional specialty societies. And this has been an interesting session. So, just to kind of lay a little bit of where we are in session and what kind of changes had come about. And actually, this is the last year of the term. So, what's interesting about this year in this session is that this is an election year. So, in Maryland, all elected officials statewide have to run for office. So, that's the governor, the lieutenant governor, attorney general, and every delegate and senator. Election years are always interesting because you get more bills in election year. This year, though, is also a year, as was mentioned, that we have had fiscal issues once again. Last year, they thought they closed a $1.4 billion deficit. And in November, they found out for various reasons that the deficit was 1.5 billion going into the next fiscal year. Now, the bigger issue, though, is our structural deficit. The structural deficit is such that by 2030, it's supposed to go to $4 billion if no changes have been made. So this year, when the governor did introduce his budget, a lot of it is taking money out of the rainy day fund and what they call fund swaps. When there's money or specially funded monies left in accounts, some of that has been taken into the general fund. Now, for E&M codes, just to let you know, the governor did level fund E&M codes. This year, there's been no cut, so the level is always compared to Medicare. So we are waiting to see whether or not we always advocate for 100% of Medicare, but what that means for level funding. So that's the budget. One of the biggest changes that occurred this session was leading up to session. And you may have remembered reading about this in the newspaper, but at the first or second week of December, Speaker Adrienne Jones announced her resignation. And that then triggered a series of events. And ultimately, the chair of what was then the House Health and Government Operations Committee, Jocelyn Penamelnick, was elected by her colleagues as the new Speaker of the House. And right off the bat, she made some pretty significant changes. For as long as I can remember, we've had 6 committees in the House. We now have 7 committees. We have a new committee dedicated to government, labor, and elections. So that actually has reduced the number of members on each committee down to about 19 from around 23, 24 members. And probably almost every chair or vice chair or both were changed up under her new leadership. And some subject matters were changed too into different committees. So that was pretty significant going into session. Now, for this session, and now the Senate, I will just say there was very little changes in the Senate, pretty much status quo. But this session, what they have done, and again, if you look at the news, you'll see it. There have been some pretty large bills debated and passed early on. Usually those are delayed, but you might have seen that the House passed a redistricting bill. That is still over in the Senate and does not have the support of Senator Ferguson. But both chambers passed, and the governor has now signed a bill that prohibits states from entering into agreements with ICE. That has now taken effect. But, some of the priority issues, which has been, I would say, immigration and budget, have been taken on early this session as opposed to later. Now we are in the throes of session. The bill introduction date has passed. So at this point, Maryland ACEP has pretty much reviewed all the bills that have been introduced affecting emergency medicine or just the practice of medicine. There might be a few what I call stragglers coming over, or bills that we will still be taking a look at on Monday. The Maryland ACEP Policy Committee always meets at 1 p.m. on Monday, and it is open to everybody. And as what was mentioned earlier, I'm going to talk about a couple bills, but I'm going to do it in buckets. I'm not going to just rattle off bill numbers. I don't think that that's helpful to you, but just talk about more of some of the subjects that we're seeing. And as Dr. Forrestal mentioned, we have seen, and this has been a growing trend, that because of a lot of workforce issues and shortages, many have taken it upon themselves to use an access issue to expand their scope. And some of the bills that we're seeing this year are really focusing on prescribing authority. So there is a bill that has been heard now in the House and Senate. It was yesterday, that would provide natural pass with the ability to prescribe. The bill basically is unlimited in their prescribing authority for non-CDS, but it would limit CDS to a formulary, which is basically schedules 3 through 5. So MedChi did oppose that. Maryland ACEP was on record for opposing that, as well as other specialties. But again, there is strong views, especially in the House, on the need to create more access. Now, another bill that was heard yesterday is a bill that would allow pharmacists to be able to prescribe medication based on what was ill-defined as minor illnesses. And for those who can't see me, I'm doing air quotes. We did have 2 doctors from Maryland ACEP provide testimony. One was Dr. Forrestal, and the other was Dr. Martin, Susanna Martin, who provided great examples on how something could present that may look minor, but is actually acute conditions that can be fatal. I'm going to stop right here and actually let Dr. Forrestal explain a little bit more of the examples he gave And I'm going to have him tell, he gave an amazing last line that I think we should actually get buttons created for. So Dr. Forstall, if you could give
Sure.
your take on those examples and how you viewed the bill, because I will say one thing, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Forstall. As a lobbyist, we can sit at the table and we do it every day, and we can talk about education requirements and residency and the lack of education. But to hear real stories from individuals in the field is priceless. And to me, if this bill does not move, it was because of the stories presented by Maryland ACEP members. Take it away.
Thank you. The first thing I was very impressed with is that the guy who sponsored the naturopath bill could not pronounce the word naturopathic. He was purely incapable of actually saying the word. And the examples that we used, you guys are all going to know. So the first one is the guy who comes in with the cough. You know, it's like, yeah, it's just been kind of dry, no fever and all like that. You take the x-ray and there's the cancer, right? Everybody in this meeting who's done any clinical care has had that experience. So, and the other one was a little more unique to me. I had a little old British lady come in, very proper, about 90 pounds, talk the Queen's English. And she was, I said, hello, I'm Dr. Forstall. And she belches like a sailor. She lets out this burp, and it was like, whoa. She goes, I'm so sorry, I can't stop. And she just kept belching. Of course, it was an inferior wall MI that was irritating the diaphragm and making her belch like that. We got the EKG, like, what do you want an EKG on a belching lady? And of course, it was a STEMI. So those two. And then Susanna's was one where it was a UTI that turned out to be genital herpes from domestic or from sexual abuse. And I can't remember
On a child, by the way.
on
This
a
was a
child, yeah.
pediatric.
And I can't remember what her other one was. And then the final phrase that popped in my head, we had this person from Walmart was long about how great they are, but they're not going to be accurate. And the phrase was, access without accuracy is delayed harm. So that was very well received. Apparently we got some applause from the audience. Golf claps. So
yes, silent claps, but it is always very reassuring to hear that. It resonated very well with everyone in the room. And then the last scope bill that again deals with prescribing is psychologists. Psychologists have asked for prescribing authority. And I will say one of the issues, no matter how many times we talk about education and residency, and the AMA has this wonderful wheel that shows all the practitioners, providers, their education. But it is still always surprising when we hear somebody question or say statements that, for example, they did not know that psychologists don't go to medical school. So those are some of the things that, we encounter down in Annapolis when we're looking at scope. Another big kind of like bucket that we work on, and this is actually where I work on the most, is health insurance issues, the dreaded health insurance. Now, again, we're always a little bit behind the eight ball with health insurance because Maryland only has the authority to regulate the fully insured marketplace, which is basically your individual and small group market. We cannot touch the ERISA plans. Those are the large plans that are regulated by the federal government. So at the end of the day, we have jurisdiction over, in the commercial market, about 18% of the population. And then, of course, Medicaid. But any changes you make to Medicaid is always going to generate a fiscal note. But, I always appreciated now Speaker Penamelnick when an insurer would say, well, why should we do this? Because it's only 18%. And she would always say, but if you're part of the 18%, it matters. And I always appreciated that. So some of the bills that we're looking at this year, we do have a downcoding bill that has been introduced. It's based off of the model acts from National ACEP and the AMA. And basically what that is doing is it is prohibiting automatic downcoding. And then there's certain provisions that we have for emergency medicine. There is a specific provision in there that basically says that you can't downcode based on the final diagnosis. That the claim has to be based on the presentation of symptoms by a prudent lay person. And of course, as you all know, the example that's always given is the person who comes in thinking they're having a heart attack and it's a, acid reflux. And that's how the insurer will pay you on the acid reflux. And then there's some other provisions too in there about before you can pay the claim at a lesser amount, you have to provide notice to the provider, and that claim also has to be reviewed by a real person, not by an algorithm. And that person, we took language out of the prior authorization law that the person has to be in the same specialty and have clinical knowledge or actual knowledge, something along those lines. That language went into the code a couple years ago when we were realizing, and one of the better examples that I saw was an issue with an ophthalmologist, and the denial was for macular degeneration, and the person who was reviewing it was a pediatrician. So probably somebody who had never actually seen a case of macular degeneration. So again, we have the downcoding bill, and we are working with the Hospital Association on that. There is also a bill on credentialing and provider panels. One of the biggest issues for Maryland is that section of law hasn't been updated in 30 years. So insurers have 120 days to approve an application, which also then delays payment. We are aligning ourselves with other states and have moved it down to 30 days. And then we also have some provisions in there to enhance transparency and communication. So those are probably the two main bills. There is a bill that has been introduced or requested for introduction. Its hearing is next week. It's a bill by the Maryland Insurance Administration, and it is requiring more advance notice when it looks like a healthcare, a provider or a healthcare system is going to be terminated from a insurer network. This is in direct relation to United Healthcare, and I think it's called Women's Care, OBGYN, that got a lot of press in Montgomery County, as well as, of course, Hopkins. I think it was Hopkins with United. So this bill is basically the insurance administration realized that they only get notices after the fact. So this is requiring advance notice. It's also tightening the requirements for if a provider is not going to be renewed, the information and the time frame when the insurer has to send information to their enrollees, including those who have received treatment in the certain time period from that provider. So I would say that those are kind of the three bigger insurance bills that we've been looking at. There is also a lot of little bills that are coming in. For example, there's a bill being heard tomorrow actually, on requiring the insurers to provide an itemized statement that separates out interest payments. When I first looked at it, I was thinking, I wonder why we would do that. And then I kind of started thinking about it a little bit more. And if a insurer doesn't pay timely, they are required to pay interest. But there is no way to track that interest, and there's no way to see if they are actually complying with the law. So requiring them to actually break that out will hopefully help with compliance, but also just your own bookkeeping, and making sure that you are getting all the money that is owed to you. So a little bill, but I think it might have a bigger impact than was initially thought of. The other bucket I'll just say is that we always look at is just what we always call kind of like, well, my colleague, my law partner, Steve Wise, handles a lot of these issues, the boards and commissions. And for example, there is a bill that the Maryland Healthcare Commission has requested for introduction. Its hearing is next week, but it would give the Maryland Healthcare Commission the ability to approve, deny, or approve with conditions healthcare transactions between healthcare facilities when one is being acquired. It is a very complicated bill. There's a lot of concern about some of the provisions and actually just deciphering what it means. The medical community is opposed to it, not in theory, but more of just it was a very long bill that came in very late with no discussion, and it needs discussion. And there is still a concern, and it was raised today, of whether or not there should be a third party who can actually approve private healthcare transactions. The main gist of the bill is the concern over private equity coming in. But, one of the issues that have also been raised is that this bill seems to be focused on just transactions when a healthcare provider or healthcare facility is being acquired. But it's very unclear. It looks like it's only if another healthcare facility or entity is acquiring that practice. And our concern has also been we are seeing more and more insurance companies buying healthcare practices and healthcare companies, and the impact that has on the marketplace. So those are some of the discussions that will be had on that bill. We assume there will also be a couple work groups on it. And then what we're also seeing is kind of an interesting take on CEUs. So in the past, there have been bills that have mandated CEUs for all healthcare providers. We've had structural racism, implicit bias, and not that those are not laudable requirements, but the issue has been that when you are mandating a CEU, there is only so much time that specialties have. And if they're taking one CEU, then they might not be able to take special CEUs that are more focused on their own specialty. So this year, what we're starting to see is incentivizing CEUs. And the speaker has a bill that has been introduced. And again, this is the speaker, where for menopause training and CEUs, that if you take an approved course that the department is required to approve, you will get double CEUs for it. So it's more of an incentive for certain CEUs and not a mandate in clinical training, which the medical community has always, like I said, been opposed to mandated CEUs. So an interesting take on trying to incentivize certain areas where there's a belief that more training is necessary. So that's pretty much the session. As a whole, as I was saying before, we're past the bill introduction date. So the committees are really narrowing down on bill hearings and working bills. We had over 3,000 introduced, which is why I do look more tired. And the big date that we're looking at right now is March 23rd. That is the date that is known as crossover. And for a bill to be considered timely, it has to pass out of the originating chamber by March 23rd and cross over to the opposite chamber. If it doesn't make the 23rd, then it's not considered timely. And that bill, when it crosses over, will go into the Rules Committee, where it may be voted out or it may sit there and just languish. So that's why everybody is focusing on the 23rd. And then after that, we only have three more weeks, and spring training will be during that time, and the warmth will hopefully come and session will end. And then the legislators will all be campaigning because at the end of June is the primary election. So I am going to take a moment. I can be a little bit of an auctioneer this time of year, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
One other bill just to mention, the
Oh,
violence in sacred places is going up. I think it's too late for, I think it's Tuesday. So is it
oh,
too
no,
late?
no, no, no. It's not Tuesday. It was just introduced.
Oh, okay. If maybe just we'll put out to the group if anybody wants to testify. I can't. Lisa Tenney from the CEN guys, the Emergency Nurses Association, flagged me and wanted to know if I wanted to testify again. We did last year and we didn't win. But if anybody wants to have a crack at that, it's a lot of fun to hang out for several hours and talk for 2 minutes. So, all right. Any questions? I think we're at a. Please raise your hands, and we've got a pretty manageable group here, I think. So just raise your hand if you have any questions on anything going on.
And I will also point out too that as far as testimony, we welcome you to come join us in Annapolis, but your time is precious. So they do still allow Zoom testimony, where unfortunately you're still kind of subjected to a long wait period oftentimes, but you don't have to come down to Annapolis.
So, all right. Any questions on anything we were doing? We're not going to take everybody's time if nobody has questions.
And the hearing on the crime of violence is March 5th.
March 5th. Okay. So if anybody wants to take a look at that and can testify, by all means, get in contact with us. All right. So we'll keep this one short.